Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue our 10 Flaw series with another tank. In our last episode, we explained why the AAT is terribly designed. Now we'll be looking at the Separatist Armored Assault Tank. I'm usually not a huge fan of the aesthetics of the Separatist droid army, whether it's their large dreadnoughts or the B-1 battle droids. But ever since I saw the Hovertank in Episode 1 Phantom Menace being used by the Trade Federation, I fell in love with the look and design of this vehicle. It's an awesome combination of clean lines and aggressive firepower. What's there not to like? Well, apparently a lot. Like the AT-AT, the AAT uses an alternative form of locomotion. Instead of wheels or tracks, the Separatist Hovertank uses powerful repulsors to keep it floating above the ground. Repulsor technology is extremely advanced in the Star Wars universe and able to propel a wide variety of ground, air, and even space vehicles. It's a relatively stable and reliable technology that can lift the AAT's mass off the ground along with 500 kilos of cargo weight. We're not given the exact weight of the vehicle, but it's probably quite heavy because the AAT tops out at only 55 kilometers, which is slower than the massive AT-AT, which uses legs to move at a top speed of 60 kilometers. This makes no sense though. The repulsors are supposed to suspend the weight of the vehicle above the ground. We're not really sure how this works, there's no information in canon, but in Legends they claim that repulsors are powered by refined subnuclear knots of spacetime, which sounds like a bunch of space magic to me. But they do refer to the technology as anti-gravity several times and note that the repulsors only work when in proximity of a gravity well, like a planet or a star. So however they work, repulsors make the AAT weightless. There's no contact between the vehicle and the ground, so no friction is there to resist movement. Therefore, its speed should only be limited by the power of the vehicle's thrust and friction from air resistance. While I can imagine it takes a lot of energy to get something as large as an AAT moving and to stop it, but it should be able to hit a sustained speed well over 55 kilometers per hour. By the way, 55 kilometers per hour is around 32 miles per hour. In comparison, one of the fastest non-human Jedis, Usain Bolt, can hit a top speed of 28 miles per hour for a short period of time. As we talked about endlessly in our last video about the AT-AT walkers, speed and maneuverability is still incredibly important on the Star Wars battlefield. Even the best shields and armor can eventually be worn down, so it's better not to test them at all in the first place. Now we know that the AAT is extremely slow and heavy, but that weight doesn't necessarily mean the Hovertank is heavily armored. We've seen time and time again a Hovertank can easily be taken out by a shoulder-launched missile like the Plex. The AAT did incorporate sloping armor, which generally is more effective against kinetic rounds, but I think the entire profile of the tank is a little bit too high. It could have been made with a much lower profile, in my opinion, making it harder to hit. Here's how an AAT would look like next to a more modern Earth-designed tank. The AAT was also extremely vulnerable to explosives placed underneath the tank and also towards the rear where all the more important components of the tank were placed. As reliable as repulsor technology was, there was no redundant system for the AAT if the repulsor generator was knocked out by a well-timed shot to the rear of the vehicle, or if the AAT drove over a landmine. EMP pulse weapons also disabled the vehicle, making them collapse to the ground. And once these repulsors were disabled, the tanks were basically impossible to move, unlike wheeled vehicles which could be towed by another vehicle. Now, it's unknown how high the repulsors can lift the vehicle. Lighter vehicles like speeders can essentially fly with their repulsors dialed to the right setting. The AAT's repulsors don't seem to have this kind of capability for some reason, which makes it unable to tackle uneven ground or more off-road surfaces. Another unexpected consequence of having a repulsor lift as your main propulsion system is that it can't drive through a deflector shield. Again, we're not given the reason why this happens, but I'm guessing it's because deflector shields usually contain ray and particle shields, which can block both physical objects and also particles. It's possible whatever the deflector shields can block will also block the anti-gravity measures of a repulsor lift. This is a huge oversight in design by the Separatist droid army because many large conventional battles in the Star Wars galaxy will include theater shields or even planetary shields. While wheeled vehicles, walkers, and ground units can slowly pass through these shields, these Hovertanks will have to be transported in by another means, and they'll have to have the repulsors completely turned off in order to pass through a shield. In some cases, they'll just have to wait outside the shield until infantry units are able to take down the generators. This wouldn't have been such a big deal if the AAT wasn't the Separatists' main assault tank and armed for that exact purpose. No matter how powerful your gun might be, if you can't make it to the battle, you're pretty much useless. The Separatist droid army was made up of 100% droids. Occasionally you'll have an organic or half-organic commander, and special forces might also be organic, but there was basically no reason to design organic interfaces for all of your vehicles and technology. Some designs in the CIS reflected the mechanical nature of their military, like the droid fighters or the IG-227 Hailfire class droid tank. You know what makes the Hailfire class such a great vehicle? Besides the barrage of homing missiles it has and the wheel propulsion system that allows it to move incredibly fast, if the Hailfire is ever knocked out, no clone trooper can go into it and commandeer it and then turn it against the Separatist army. That's because the Hailfire class didn't have a cockpit or any interface for organics. And because it didn't have these unnecessary compartments, it made the vehicle lighter, smaller, and much faster. The AAT, for some reason, was designed for an organic crew with fully laid out control surfaces with mechanical levers, buttons, and switches. This is a tank designed for a droid army that only uses droids. Droids that can interface with a vehicle without any physical controls. And not only are there controls for organics in the AAT, it also requires a crew of 4 droids to fully operate. This creates an open space within the AAT, which makes it larger and heavier, and that open space could have been used for armor or something more important like a shield generator. The crew consists of 2 gunners, a driver, and a commander. All these tasks should be able to be handled by just one computer brain. After all, the Hailfire class droid can maneuver, shoot, command itself all at the same time with no problem. There's only one reason why they want to design the AAT in this way, and that's because they want to sell it to organic armies. But even then, automating the AAT tank by placing an advanced droid brain in it couldn't be that hard. After all, the AAT had been used more than a decade before the Clone Wars even started. There was plenty of time to adapt to a new system. You're probably better off taking the tank crew and assigning them to protect the blind spots of the AAT. Like the AT-AT, the AAT was commonly deployed without any infantry support, leading to its eventual destruction. Countless Separatist tanks were destroyed by infantry units climbing up the tank and then dropping EMP grenades or detonators down into the commander and driver hatches, which should have been locked in the first place. I mean, in World War II, American tankers on the Western Front typically didn't lock their hatches unless they were completely overrun. That was because they had infantry support, and generally German soldiers couldn't get that close to the tank. But then again, they didn't have dickhead Jedi running around the battlefield with magical powers distributing detonators to tank crews. But it wasn't just the Jedi with their supernatural powers doing this, it was also the clone troopers and your average resistance fighter. And that was not only because of the lack of infantry support, but because of the massive blind spots around the vehicle, especially in the rear. Once again, we asked the same question we asked in our last episode with the AT-AT and also with the X-Wing. Why can't they have some kind of external sensor or holo recorder that gives the crew inside a 360 view of its surroundings? This is Star Wars. They are much more advanced than our own society, yet our militaries are already testing AR systems as we speak for armored vehicles. And although the AAT did have anti-personnel lasers on it, they were fixed in a forward position. The AAT's main cannon was a beast. It was able to easily take out Republic ATTEs with a few well-placed shots. One of the problems with this weapon though was its massive recoil. Because the AAT wasn't rooted to the ground, it lacked the stability of a traditional firing platform. And that's even more confusing because the AAT was occasionally used as an artillery weapon both for direct and indirect fire, and without any locking mechanism to secure the vehicle, it had accuracy issues, especially when firing multiple rounds at the same location. Unlike traditional energy weapons, the AAT's main cannon also functioned like a kinetic energy one. The AAT was actually equipped with shells that were encased in plasma. The claims are that the metal shell helped increase penetration of the round and reduce the friction, increasing speed. Now, the penetration reason makes sense, but I'm not so sure about the friction idea and the increase in speed, although we do know that plasma rounds typically dissipate the longer they travel because the plasma cools down. Now, if there is a conductor like metal, which is able to surround the plasma, or the plasma surrounds the metal, I guess it can use as a conducting material to maintain its form for a longer period of time. There are also different types of shells, from bunker busters to high explosives to anti-personnel, and even a special tank that fired defoliator rounds. Although I agree there are some advantages to having actual shells fire out of your cannon, the main problem is now that the tank has to carry a large amount of ammunition, which definitely increases the weight of your vehicle and limits how many shots you can fire, opposed to a Tibanna gas-powered laser cannon. The AAT could only carry 57 rounds before it needed to be reloaded. With a Tibanna gas laser cannon, your main concern is overheating rather than running out of gas. The shells also depended on an autoloader system, which was just another component that could break down. Also, all the shells were located at the bottom of the tank, which also is where the armor was the thinnest, making a small landmine detonation turn into a massive explosion. So while the cannon's power was impressive, it also had some major design flaws which limited the effectiveness of an AAT. Another option that could either replace or at least supplement the AAT's firepower would be missile launchers, like the ones we see on the Hailfire droid. The Separatists were known for their advanced missile technology and used it very successfully against the Republic. These weapons were typically guided, had a much longer range than traditional energy weapons, and had more explosive damage. The only problem was they were quite expensive and took a lot of space. They also could be stopped by countermeasures, but typically only starfighters and larger starships had countermeasures. While some AATs were outfitted with dumb rockets, imagine how much damage they could do with a few long-range missiles that functioned beyond line of sight. The Republic heavily depended on line-of-sight weapons. An AAT could destroy several walkers before they got even close to them with a long-range missile system. And if they had a Tabana gas laser cannon system, they could replace those shells with missiles instead. Now, my last complaint with the Separatist AAT is its turret. It hardly ever seems to turn. It seems like it has the capability to slightly turn, but only when the vehicle is not moving. I might be wrong, but it's really hard to find footage or information on how much the turret actually moves. Also, because it's located at the rear of the vehicle, it can't decline the barrel that much, making a huge blind spot in front of the tank. Now, according to my research, George Lucas originally wanted the AAT to be more like a heavily armored assault chopper, or a flying tank similar to the Hind. You can kind of still see some resemblance in its design. This might explain why the hull kind of extends upwards so much, allowing the pilot and gunner to sit at staggered heights so that they can both have a clear line of sight, even though the Separatist tank doesn't even have any viewports. The stubby arms on the side of the tank that carries additional weapons also is very reminiscent of an assault chopper. And then there's adding a repulsor lift to the tank, which is another helicopter-like quality. That's probably why the AAT is also so visually appealing to me. It just looks like a giant bird of prey. But as a main battle tank, it just isn't well designed as, say, the Republic's own hover tank, TX-130 Sabre class. Well guys, you probably watched our last video where we broke down the 10 flaws of the AT-AT. If not, we'll link it in the corner somewhere around here with a card. I want to know in the comment section below which tank you think is better, the Walker from last time or the Separatist Hovertank. Also, let me know what other kind of videos you'd like to see in our 10 flaws series. We can break down anything from vehicles, factions, to even aliens, I guess. Anyway guys, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.